Hello everybody, this is another tutorial video showing you how you can make your own tamogachi style egg, or I guess neopet. I've never actually played tamogachi, but like a neopets kind of thing where you can just generate an egg with a random pattern on it, random colors, and I'll show you how that looks. So you see it's egg, you can get some random patterns, some triangles, some stars, maybe some circles. And there'll be random colors at random places. And some of them look pretty cool. Like you can generate some pretty crazy looking stuff. And you can always like adjust, how many things you want to be shown, where exactly you want them to be shown, what symbols you want, if you only wanted circles or if you only wanted squiggles, triangles, or stars or whatever, you can do that. Or if you wanted them to be always the same color, you can do that too. But I'm just going to show you how to make this. You can get some cool results out of these randomly generated egg looking things. Alright, so I'm going to take you step by step through this code. First, we are in, I only have one object in this entire game, it's object tamogachi. So first thing we do in the create event is we want to randomize. We have a lot of random numbers in this game, and random and any computational anything is never really truly random. What you're getting is something based on a seed. And so if the seed is by default always the same, so if I just started the game and I have all these random numbers, the first iterations will always be the same. Like it'll always be the same pattern. So what you want to do is you want to randomize the seed going into the game. So there's a lot of ways you can do that, but GameMaker has this really handy function just called randomize. So you can call the randomize at create, and it will randomize your seed for you. And so that's nice. So we do that first, and then we create some macros. And macros are something I've gotten into before, but basically what they are is you call them using hashtag macro, and then whatever name you want the macro to be, and then whatever you want the macro to be, like whatever you want it to do. And they are constant, so after you create them, you cannot change them. Like I couldn't redefine random place somewhere else or random scale. You can have them be dynamic or static things, like I could make this macro special number, right? Or I like to have my constants always capital. Special number, and I can make that like 0.234 whatever, number. And then whenever I call special number, it'll be that number. But remember again, they are constant, and what a constant is something that cannot be changed. Or you can make them something dynamic like we've done above. So I've made this irandom range between 0 and the sprite width. And that will, every time I call random place, it will basically just copy and paste this bit right there and give us a random range number between 0 and sprite width. Same with right here, random range between 0.4 and 1. And by the way, the difference between irandom range and random range is irandom range will only give you integer values between these two numbers. And it can, including the number, so it can be 0 and it can be the sprite width. And random range will give you any kind of crazy decimal numbers between 0.4 and 1, including those numbers. So it could be it could be 0.4, or more likely it could be 0.5, like this number right here, which is slightly more useful for scale, since we don't want it to be integer, because scale only goes from 0 to 1, 0 being non-existent, and the scale will be 0, or 1 being the max scale. So we're set it to 0.4, which is a little less than half, half the scale, half the width, half the height, and 1, which is max. And so we have a random place and a random scale, and this will be important later. And then we have a list of symbol sprites. So those little those little shapes that we're putting onto the egg. We have a list of the sprite indexes, so sprite splotch, sprite triangle, sprite star, and sprite wavy. And I have these down here, my sprites, and they're all white, and that's important, and I'll talk about that later. And then we're kind of just making some variables for our textures, which I'll be explaining what textures are in a second. But we're setting this texture to no one and this texture to no one, and they're just placeholders to say like, hey, we have created these variables. So if I call on them, don't tell me that I didn't make them, because I have made these. Because if you try to call a variable that obviously hasn't been created, the compiler will give you an error at runtime. So let's just create these placeholders, and then we're going to make a function called redraw. And what a function is, and I'll get into more detail about this at another time, but what a function really is it's a container that will run a bunch of code, and whenever you call this function, whenever I call redraw, it will run all of this for me, and I don't have to retype all this out. It will just run all this code, and that's nice. Like randomize, for instance, is a function. So when I call randomize, it will copy and paste, all of the code in the randomize function into this spot. I don't know exactly what it is, and I don't have to. That's a nice part about, encapsulation for functions. So right here in the redraw, we're creating a random blend. So a blend is going to be a color, and we're going to make color HSV with random values. And a blend is just a color that we're going to mix with the color of our sprites. We're making two of these randomly, both of HCV random colors, and that's hue, saturation, and actually don't remember what the V stands for at the moment. But these will give us random colors. And then splotches is going to be a random number between 0 and 5, and that's going to be how many shapes we want on the egg. I could have named this probably better to shapes, but at the time I thought splotches was a good name for it. So we're going to have 0 to 5 splotches on the egg, so we could have no splotches, or we could have like as many as 5 shapes. And then spots, and this is an array, and I believe I've covered arrays in another video, but this is basically a placeholder for an array, because we have these two brackets and opening and closing brackets. We're basically making an empty array that we can fill later. What an array is just like a list of, or it's kind of like a bunch of variables. So if I had spots 0, they start from 0, by the way. So if I had 5, it would go 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So spots 0 would be some kind of, I could store a number in it, and I can get spots 1, spots 2, spot whatever, and it's just a list of array variables, and they can be indexed right here. So whatever number you put in here will be the index of whatever you're trying to grab. So this will be the third variable that I'm trying to grab from this array. And then right here, we're going to repeat for how many splotches we have. So if we have 3 splotches, we're going to repeat this 3 times. We have 4 times, and so forth. So in this function, we're going to repeat this many times, and we're going to create some local variables that we're going to use to make a structure for our symbols, for our little shapes. We're going to keep track of where the shape is, what sprite we're using for the shape, where its x value is, its y value, and look at, we're using those random place macros that we defined up here. The scale, the x scale, so the x scale, how wide it is, the scale of the width, the y scale, how tall it is, the scale of the height. And we're using that random scale macro. And then the rotation, and we're going to have a rotation between -180 and 180, so it can be rotated 80 degrees. 180 is flipped all the way around. Or -180 is the same as 180, but on the other side. And then we're going to create a var spot, so a new spot, a new splotch, a new shape on our egg. And it's going to be a new symbol, and we're going to pass all of these, all of the data that we just made for sprite x, y, x scale, y scale, rotation, rot for rotation, into this structure. So if we want to take a look at what this is, what is this new symbol? What's going on here? Well, what we're doing here is we are creating a new structure, and we are passing, we want all the properties of the structure to be the ones we just passed in. And then we're going to array push, so we're going to add to the back of the array a reference to this new structure we made. And I'm going to explain what structures are right now. So I have in my scripts, script pattern, and I have this function symbol. So it's like creating a function, but it's a constructor. So what a construct is kind of like an object. It's like an object light, right? So we have, you can pass in the properties of, and then you can store them into the object. So if you want to later access some property of this symbol or of this shape, we can. I can be like, what's the sprite of this shape? What's the X value of this shape? What's the Y value? What's the scale? What's the rotation? And all of that neat stuff. So let's go back to our create event of our tamogachi object. And let's check it out. So we created this new construct and we stored it into a temporary variable, local variable. And we are going to push it to the end of the array. So we're going to add a new variable to this array spots that is going to array push. And then this is the ID of the array, which is spots. And this is what we want to add to it. So, so it's going to go splotches. It's going to repeat 20 times. It's going to add 20, or sorry, not 20, however many random or splotches ends up being of these symbols to this array. And so we're going to have an array of structures or references to structures. Initiate all these variables and do all this stuff for the first time in the create. And now if we go to the step, all we're doing is when I click the down key, keyboard check release. So when I release the VK down, which is a special code for the down arrow key, when I release that, it will call this redraw again, so I can, you know, recreate everything. I can recreate a new egg, so I can like see how that works. And then in the draw event is where most of the fun stuff happens. So we have, we're creating two new textures. And textures are interesting. Let's see what they do. So by default, you have the application texture. Or sorry, not texture, surfaces. You have the application surface. We're creating new surfaces. So what the application surface is a it's like a box, right? And it's kind of like your room, your window. It's like where everything is being drawn to. You're drawing onto the surface. So whenever you draw a shape onto the surface, like blah blah blah, you're drawing all these shapes, it will take this surface and go like, okay, we have this surface with all these sprites baked into the surface, and we're going to now draw this to the screen every frame and then wipe it clean and then re-update everything to be drawn again. And that's how that works, but you can create multiple surfaces, and that's very useful. So when we create the egg, I am creating a surface. Let's draw over here. And I'm saying, okay, let's draw the egg. Right? Let's make it a circle. All right. And then once I'm done drawing the egg onto the surface, I can then draw the surface onto the application surface. So then I draw it over here, and it will look like I'm drawing the egg, right? Because I'm drawing this surface onto this surface. And there's better tutorials on how to create surfaces and how they work, but that's the gist of it. So I'm creating these two surfaces, and I have this special function that I made called surface create safe. And what it basically does, and I'll show you over here my quality of life functions, is what it does is if it checks if a surface exists, the surface we passed in, and it goes, if this surface exists, we're just going to return the surface, and then we're going to store it in that surface reference. Else, we're going to create a new surface with the width and height, and then store it in that surface reference. So the reason why we're doing that, the reason why we're always checking if the surface is still there, or is it still created, is it still there, is when you minimize the game window, it actually destroys all surfaces that you've created. So you'll end up with an issue where you're trying to reference a surface that no longer exists. So in the surface create safe, I'm going, okay, we're checking the surface exists, and if it doesn't, we're recreating it. But if it does, we're just returning the old surface, and that's fine. All right. So we're surface set target. Okay, so we're going away from the application surface now, and we said we want to work on a new surface. And the surface we want to be is that dot surface that we've said we have a reference to right here. And then we're gonna draw clear alpha, so we're gonna like refresh the surface every time, so we're not just drawing on top of it. So we're not, because the surface doesn't automatically refresh. So if you keep drawing to a surface and you don't refresh it, you're just gonna be drawing over what you've drawn on before. So we have to refresh it every frame or every step. And so then we have a local variable called numSpots, and we're just checking the length of spots. We're checking how many variables do we have in spots. And then we have a for loop that we've described in the last video, and basically we're just iterating through each of the spots, each of the indexes for the spots array, and we're going through each one, and then we're storing all of that data from the structures back into local variables. So then we can draw each of those shapes onto this surface. And so we're like, okay, we've created this surface. We know we're on the surface, so we're going to surface reset target, so we're going back to the application surface. Okay, now we want to go surface set target again, go to a new surface, this time our texture surface, I've called it. And we're going to draw our egg. That's the sprite index, which is obviously the sprite index for this is the egg. We want it to be the subimage sub 0, so like when you have multiple frames of a sprite, you have multiple subimages, but we only have one subimage and it starts at 0, so we're going to have the subimage be at 0. X and Y are going to be 0, 0, and the reason that is because we want them to be at 0, 0 of the surface, because the surface has its own kind of X and Y grid. So when we have 0, 0, it's going to be on the left-hand side. We draw on the left-hand side of the surface itself. The image scale, X scale, image Y scale. So if in case we ever change the MX X scale or Y scale of the object, we want it to be shown on the egg. The image angle, and then blend. We created a random blend earlier, so we want this blend, so the color to be blended into the color of the egg, which is white, so it'll always just be the color of whatever the blend is. And image alpha, so we want the same image alpha, which is the transparency of the object to always be applied to the egg. And then we want a GPU push state. And what this does, it's saying like, okay, we are going to start using GPU blend modes and like stuff like that. So we want to start that. We're going to push that state. And then we're going to GPU set blend mode ext. And this is a little complicated to explain. I mean, kind of. But basically you have, and you can look up the documentation for this. And there's better tutorial videos that kind of explain what blend modes are. But what we're doing is we're taking what we're drawing and what we're drawing to. So what we're going to be drawing is those, is that surface we made with all those shapes on it. And what we're drawing to is going to be the egg. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that if what we're drawing to has an alpha of 1, that it shows up, and if it has an alpha of 0, so it's not on the egg, because anywhere outside of the egg on this surface is going to be transparent. So we want it to not show up. And that way when you put the shapes onto the egg, it will only show what is on the egg itself, and not, anywhere else. And so that's what we're doing here, bm dest alpha, bm invert source alpha. And you can always look up the reference for this, and there's tutorials that will explain this very well. And read that very carefully, and you can kind of figure out what this is doing. and we're gonna draw surface. We're gonna redraw the surface we created earlier. We want to now draw that surface. We want to draw that surface into this new surface that we created, the texture surface. And then we're gonna stop the GPU blend mode. We're like, okay, we're gonna stop using that, and we're gonna reset the target back to the application surface, and then we're gonna draw that texture surface. So we drew the dot surface onto the texture surface, and now we're gonna draw the texture surface onto the application surface. So onto our game window. And then after all that's done, we get this egg, which has random patterns on it and stuff. And it can look really cool. You can mess around with this code, change it up if you want. It's really malleable and easy to kind of adjust how you want this to be done. But that's about that. If you have any questions, let me know. I know I went very fast, but you can always go back in the video and kind of rewatch what I said and try to like really understand. I kind of went over a lot of things very, very quickly and kind of in shallow detail. If you want a tutorial on any of the individual things, like if you want a tutorial on functions, or if you want a tutorial on just on surfaces or GPU like blend modes from me, I'd be willing to do that. Just tell me in the comments. And also, if you want me to go further with this, if you want me to like actually make a Tamagotchi or a Neopets like game where like you can have a little egg that you nurture and then hatches, and you can have a little animal that you have to feed and take care of, then let me know just in the comments if you want any of that, or if you notice I did anything wrong in this video, let me know in the comments about that too. Feel free to subscribe if you want, or don't. I don't plan on monetizing any of this. This is just for educational purposes. But I hope you enjoyed or learned something or got some valuable info on how to do something kind of similar to this. And as you can see, you can get some really cool results on these eggs. Some of them look really nice. Like, look at that. That almost looks like a Yoshi egg. Kind of had some inspiration from Togepi from Pokemon. That their egg is kind of neat looking. So, you know, stars and squiggles and circles and things like that, and triangles. But yeah, that's about it. Thank you guys.